The sacred stones were wrong. Old Silas Ward had seen enough Apache ceremonies to know when the spirits weren't pleased. The 4 white rocks that should mark the cardinal direction sat askew, their surfaces catching the morning sun at angles that made his weathered hands clench. He'd fought alongside these people for 30 winters, married into their clan, buried his Mary beneath their red earth. Now, watching young Ayanna prepare for her wedding, something cold settled in his gut like bad whiskey. The bride stood motionless as her aunts draped the doe-skin dress over her slender frame, 18 summers old, with hair black as obsidian falling to her waist. Ayanna kept her eyes fixed on the distant mesas. Her fingers, usually steady when weaving baskets or skinning game, trembled as they touched the turquoise beads at her throat. The elders said she was lucky. Marrying a white trader meant goods for the tribe, protection from the cavalry, maybe even peace. But Silas had seen that look before, in the eyes of mustangs about to be broken. "The smoke ain't right neither," muttered Thomas Crowfeather, squatting beside Silas. The younger warrior's scarred face turned toward the ceremonial fire, where juniper and sage should have perfumed the air with blessing. Instead, the smoke rose thick and acrid, making the children cough and the dogs whine. "Smells like they're burning greenwood, or worse." Silas nodded, his hand unconsciously checking the knife at his belt. In 43 years among the Apache, he'd learned to read signs like other men read newspapers. The medicine man, Eagle Eye, seemed distracted, forgetting words of the blessing chant that he'd performed 100 times. Even the wedding drums, those sacred instruments passed down through generations, couldn't find their rhythm. The beats came irregular, like a dying man's heart. The groom stood apart from the Apache men, surrounded by 4 companions who claimed to be his trading partners. Malachi Brooks cut a tall figure in his black coat and string tie, his face shaved smooth as a boy's despite his 30-odd years. He smiled often, showing teeth white as cemetery stones, but the smile never reached his pale blue eyes. When he'd ridden into their camp 3 moons ago with wagons full of rifles and ammunition, blankets and coffee, the tribal council had welcomed him like rain after drought. "My Sarah says his hands are soft," Thomas continued, voice low enough that only Silas could hear. "Says when he helped unload them wagons, he got blisters from work any woman could do. What kind of trader has hands like a banker?" The observation sent another chill through Silas. He studied Brooks's companions, men who stood too straight, moved too much in unison, kept their hands too close to their sides where guns might hide. One of them, a thick-set fellow with red whiskers, had a peculiar scar on his neck. Silas had seen enough saber wounds to recognize one, even partially hidden by a collar. Chief Joseph Running Bear emerged from his lodge, magnificent in his eagle feather headdress and ceremonial paint. At 60 winters, he moved with the dignity of mountains, but Silas caught the uncertainty in his eyes. The chief had agreed to this match for his daughter's sake and his people's survival. The Apache were tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of watching their children starve. If marriage to a white trader brought peace, wasn't it worth one woman's happiness? Ayanna's mother, Mourning Dove, began the traditional keening that marked a daughter's departure from her family. But her voice cracked on the high notes, and tears ran channels through her face paint. This wasn't the joyful sorrow of a mother seeing her child wed. This was grief, raw and terrible. "Something's coming," Silas said, standing with joints that protested 5 decades of hard living. "Can feel it in my bones, same as before Skeleton Canyon." Thomas stood too, his hand moving to the Winchester propped against a wagon wheel. Around them, the wedding guests continued their preparations, women arranging food on blankets, children chasing dogs between the lodges, warriors painting their faces for the celebration dance. Nearly 200 souls had gathered from 3 Apache bands, the largest assembly in years. The thought made Silas's unease grow heavier. Brooks moved forward as the sun reached its zenith, his boots clicking on the packed earth in a rhythm that sounded military. He'd insisted on a noon ceremony, claiming it was lucky in his culture. But Silas knew Apache weddings happened at dawn or dusk, when the spirits were closest. Noon was when the white man's cavalry liked to attack, when shadows were short and there was nowhere to hide. The trader reached for Ayana's hand, and she flinched before forcing herself still. Her father spoke the binding words in Apache, which the visiting minister, a nervous man with sweat staining his black coat, translated into English. But the words came out wrong, twisted. Where Running Bear spoke of two rivers joining, the minister said surrender. Where the chief blessed their union with children, the translator mentioned submission to God's will. That ain't what he's saying, Silas growled, but Thomas grabbed his arm. Look at the rocks again, the younger man whispered. Silas looked. The ceremonial stones had been moved during the proceedings, now forming a rough square, like a fort or a trap. His blood went cold as he noticed other details. Brooks's men had positioned themselves at the compass points, hands inside their coats. The wagons that had seemed randomly placed now clearly blocked the main paths out of the ceremonial ground. Even the minister kept glancing at a pocket watch, as if marking time. The drums stopped. In the sudden silence, a meadowlark called, 3 sharp notes that every Apache child learned meant danger. Ayana heard it too. Her dark eyes swept the gathering, saw what Silas saw, understood what he understood. But she was trapped between her father's honor and her people's need, between the knife edge of tradition and survival. Brooks produced a ring, not the traditional Apache silver band, but a heavy gold thing with a stone red as blood. As he pushed it onto Ayana's finger, she spoke for the first time, her voice carrying across the silent gathering, "This ring is cold." The groom's smile widened, showing all those cemetery teeth. "It'll warm up, darling. Everything does. In time." Chief Running Bear completed the ceremony with words that sounded more like a funeral rite than a wedding blessing. The gathered Apache began to move toward the feast tables, but their movements were slow, uncertain. Even the children had grown quiet, sensing the wrongness that hung over the celebration like smoke from that tainted fire. Silas watched Ayana walk beside her new husband, her back straight as a rifle barrel, her face composed as stone. But he saw how her free hand kept touching her knife sheath, how her eyes tracked every movement of Brooks's companions. This wasn't a bride going to her wedding feast. This was a warrior walking into battle. Alone and outnumbered, the old scout spat tobacco juice into the dust and checked his ammunition. Whatever was coming would arrive soon. The pocket watches, the positioned men, the gathered crowd. It all spoke of timing, planning, ambush. He'd survived too many fights to ignore the signs. As the wedding party reached the feast ground, where women had laid out venison and corn cakes on their best blankets, a dust cloud appeared on the eastern horizon. Brooks glanced at it with satisfaction before turning his cemetery smile back to his bride. "Ah," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "Looks like more guests are arriving. How fortunate. I do so love a large celebration." But Silas had already recognized the rhythmic dust pattern of cavalry horses moving in formation. His weathered hand found Thomas's shoulder, squeezing once in warning. The young warrior's face went hard as flint. The sacred stones were wrong, the smoke was wrong, the drums were wrong. And now, as the dust cloud grew larger and the sound of many horses reached their ears, Silas Ward knew with terrible certainty that everything was about to go wrong in ways that would water this red earth with blood before the sun set on Ayana's wedding day. The trap was closing, and 200 Apache souls stood at its center, believing they had come to celebrate love and peace. Instead, they had walked into carefully orchestrated betrayal. Silas began to move through the crowd, quiet as smoke, touching the arms of warriors he trusted, meeting their eyes with his own. The message passed without words. Be ready. Watch the whites. Protect the children. And through it all, Ayana stood beside her new husband, the blood-red ring heavy on her finger, her dark eyes holding secrets that would soon explode into violence and change everything for her people. The wedding feast was about to begin, but it would not end in celebration. The wedding feast had barely begun when Silas Ward noticed the first lie unraveling like a cheap blanket. It happened when one of Brooks's men, the red-whiskered fellow with the saber scar, reached across the feast blanket for more venison. His coat fell open, revealing not the simple pistol a trader might carry, but a military-issue Colt .45, the kind cavalry officers favored. The man caught Silas watching and quickly adjusted his coat, but his eyes held the cold assessment of a soldier sizing up an enemy, not the friendly gaze of a merchant. "Thomas," Silas murmured, not moving his lips much as he pretended to chew dried meat. "That fellow there's carrying army iron." The younger warrior followed his gaze, then stiffened. "So's the tall one by the water barrels. See how he stands, weight on his back foot, ready to pivot and draw. That's cavalry training." Around them, the wedding feast continued with forced cheer. Women served corn cakes and wild honey. Children darted between the adults playing games, and the elders smoked pipes and told stories of better times. But underneath the normalcy, Silas felt the current of unease spreading like ripples in still water. Other warriors had noticed things too. A glimpse of metal where it shouldn't be, a stance too rigid for a civilian. Eyes that watched too carefully. Malachi Brooks sat beside his new bride on decorated blankets, accepting congratulations from the tribal elders. He played his part well. Silas had to admit. The man laughed at the right moments, attempted a few words in Apache that he'd supposedly learned during his months of trading, even pretended to enjoy the traditional foods that most whites found strange. But Silas noticed how he kept checking his pocket watch, how his eyes would flick to the horizon where that dust cloud grew steadily larger. Ayanna sat still as carved stone, the heavy gold ring catching sunlight like a drop of blood on her finger. She'd changed from her wedding dress into the fine calico dress Brooks had gifted her, red as sunset with tiny white flowers. But beneath the civilized fabric, Silas could see the outline of her knife sheath against her thigh. Smart girl. She knew something was wrong, too. "Mr. Ward," a voice called out. Silas turned to find Brooks approaching. That cemetery smile stretched across his face. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Malachi Brooks, of the Brooks Trading Company out of Tucson." Silas took the offered hand, noting the softness Thomas had mentioned. These weren't hands that had loaded many wagons or led many pack trains through rough country. But there were other calluses, the kind that came from holding reins tight and working a rifle's action. "Silas Ward," he replied. "Been living with Running Bear's people since before you were born, I reckon." "Ah, yes, I've heard about you, the white man who went native." Brooks's smile never wavered, but something flickered in those pale eyes. "Must be fascinating, living among them for so long, learning all their customs, their gathering places, their numbers." The questions were too casual, too pointed. Silas felt his hackles rise. "Fascinating ain't the word I'd use. It's just life. Mr. Brooks, good life, with good people." Of course. And speaking of good people, I've brought some special supplies as additional wedding gifts. Perhaps you'd like to help distribute them. A man of your standing among these people would ensure everything is shared fairly. Silas glanced at the wagons Brooks indicated. They sat heavy on their axles, canvas covers tied down tight, too tight for easy access, which was strange for gifts meant to be distributed, and the men guarding them stood with the alert tension of sentries, not the bored patience of teamsters. "Reckon the chief can handle his own gifts," Silas said carefully. "Wouldn't want to overstep." Brooks's smile tightened just a fraction. "Of course, though I do hope everyone will partake in the feast. I've brought some special provisions, canned peaches from California, good coffee, even some bottles of medicine for the children." It would be a shame if suspicion prevented anyone from enjoying such generosity. The threat was subtle but clear. Silas met the man's gaze steadily. "Apache don't much care for canned goods. Mr. Brooks, they prefer their food fresh. As for medicine, Eagle Eye tends to all that need tending." "How traditional." Brooks checked his watch again. "Well, I should return to my bride. Pleasant talking with you. Mr. Ward, I do hope we'll have many more conversations in the future. Brief ones. I'm sure. As the trader walked away, Thomas materialized at Silas's elbow. He's counting down to something. That's the 4th time he's checked that watch in as many minutes. And them wagons ain't carrying no wedding gifts, Silas added. Too heavy, too guarded. We need to— A child's laughter cut through his words. Little Mary Weaver, barely 6 summers old, ran past chasing a wooden hoop, her mother calling after her to mind the cook fires. The sight of her innocent joy amid the gathering danger made Silas's chest tight. How many children were here? 40? 50? Too many for what his gut told him was coming. He moved through the crowd, stopping beside warriors he trusted. A hand on an arm here, a meaningful look there. The message spread quietly. Something was wrong with the traders. Be ready. Watch the children. Most importantly, don't eat or drink anything the white men offered. Near the central fire, Chief Running Bear was deep in conversation with Brooks and the nervous minister. Silas edged closer, pretending to examine a display of traded goods while straining to hear. Very generous terms, Brooks was saying. The government simply wants to ensure peaceful relations. This marriage symbolizes a new beginning. My people have heard such promises before, Running Bear replied, his dignity intact despite the doubt Silas could hear beneath. Words written on paper that disappear like smoke. Not this time. Chief, I have documents here, signed by the territorial governor himself. All I need is your mark, and your people will have protected status. No more cavalry patrols, no more forced relocations, just peace. The minister held out papers, his hands shaking slightly. Silas couldn't read from this distance, but he'd seen enough government documents to recognize the official seals. Whatever Brooks was selling, he'd come well prepared. I will consider your words, Running Bear said slowly. After the feast, when the ceremonies are complete. Of course. Brooks smiled wider, those cemetery teeth gleaming. Though I should mention, the cavalry patrol approaching, purely coincidental, I assure you, might misinterpret any delay as reluctance. Colonel McGraw is not known for his patience with negotiations. McGraw. Silas knew that name. A butcher who'd earned his reputation at Sand Creek, shooting women and children alongside warriors. If McGraw was coming, this wasn't a wedding, it was a massacre waiting to happen. He found Thomas again, pulled him behind a wagon. McGraw's cavalry is that dust cloud. We need to get the women and children out. Now! Can't— Brooks' men have the paths blocked. I sent Daniel Running Wolf to scout. They've got rifles in them wagons, and men stationed all around. We move. They'll know we know. Silas cursed under his breath. It was a perfect trap. Gather the Apache for a celebration, something that wouldn't raise suspicion. Get them all in one place, relaxed and unsuspecting. Then— the food, he said suddenly. Brooks mentioned medicine for the children, special provisions. What if— A woman's scream cut through the air, near the feast blankets. Sarah Littlefoot had collapsed, her body convulsing. Her husband Joseph knelt beside her, calling her name, but her eyes had rolled back, foam specking her lips. Then another scream, and another. Warriors who'd been eating heartily moments before doubled over, clutching their stomachs. Children who'd snuck treats from the white men's supplies began crying, then vomiting, then falling terrifyingly still. The food's poisoned, Thomas snarled, reaching for his rifle, but Silas grabbed his arm. Wait, look. Not everyone was affected. Those who'd eaten only traditional foods, who'd refused the canned goods and bottled drinks Brooks had provided, remained standing. The trader had been selective, targeting those most likely to fight, leaving enough healthy to witness what came next. Brooks stood beside Ayanna, his hand tight on her arm as she tried to go to her fallen people. Now, dear wife, best to stay with me. Things are about to become unpleasant. The pocket watch came out again. This time, Brooks didn't bother to hide his satisfaction. Right on schedule, he announced to his men. Positions, gentlemen. His 4 companions spread out, throwing off their merchant disguises to reveal military uniforms beneath. The wagon covers flew back, exposing not trade goods but rifles, already loaded and pointed at the crowd. From the surrounding hills, more men appeared, soldiers who'd crept close while everyone focused on the wedding. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brooks called out, his voice carrying across the ceremonial ground. Or should I say, savages and squaws. By order of the United States government, this illegal assembly is now under military control. Chief Running Bear, you will sign the surrender documents immediately, ceding all Apache lands to federal authority. Refuse and Colonel McGraw's cavalry will ensure no one leaves this place alive. The chief stood slowly, his eagle feathers rustling in the desert wind. Around him, his people lay dying or stood frozen in shock. His daughter remained captive in the grip of her false husband. His warriors were outnumbered, outgunned, and many already poisoned. "You speak of papers while my people die?" Running Bear's voice held the controlled fury of thunder before lightning. "This is your peace? This is your new beginning?" "This is reality." Brooks replied coldly. "Your time is over. Chief, sign the papers, and those who survive will be relocated to the reservation. Refuse, and they'll be buried here." Silas felt the weight of his years, the ache of old wounds, the burden of seeing too much death. But he also felt the familiar calm that came before battle. He'd lived a good life. If this was where it ended, protecting the people who'd become his family, so be it. He caught Thomas's eye, saw the same resolution there. Around them, other warriors were making the same choice. They were outnumbered, possibly dying from poison, certainly doomed. But they were Apache. They would not go quietly. In the center of it all, Ayanna stood perfectly still, her dark eyes moving from her dying people to her captor husband. The heavy gold ring on her finger caught the light like a beacon, like a target, like a promise of blood to come. The trap had sprung, but even the best traps sometimes caught more than the hunter bargained for. And in the distance, growing closer with each heartbeat, came the thunder of cavalry hooves. The poisoned feast spread its horror like wildfire through dry grass. Sarah Littlefoot's convulsions had stopped, her body now terrifyingly still on the feast blanket. Her husband Joseph cradled her head, his warrior's face crumbling into grief. Around them, the wedding celebration transformed into a nightmare of retching, writhing bodies and anguished cries. Silas Ward forced himself to think past the rage burning in his chest. He'd seen battlefields before, but this, women and children gasping for air, elders clutching their stomachs in agony. This was something else. This was calculated evil. "How many?" he asked Thomas, who'd been moving among the fallen. "Near 40 down already," the younger warrior reported, his scarred face hard as granite. "More getting sick. Mostly those who ate the canned peaches or drank that coffee Brooks brought. 40 out of 200 souls, already a fifth lost or dying, and the cavalry hadn't even arrived yet. Little Mary Weaver, the girl who'd been chasing her hoop, lay in her mother's arms, her small body burning with fever. The sight nearly broke Silas's resolve to wait, to think, to plan, but rushing into gunfire wouldn't save her or any of the others. Brooks still held Ayanna's arm, though she'd stopped struggling. The traitor had dropped all pretense of civility now, his cemetery smile replaced by the cold satisfaction of a plan working perfectly. His men had taken positions around the ceremonial ground, rifles trained on the remaining Apache. "The medicine!" Eagle Eye gasped from where he knelt beside a fallen child. The old medicine man's hands shook as he tried to force herbs between blue lips. "I need my medicine bag. Let him through." Brooks commanded his men. "Let them all see how useless their primitive remedies are against modern chemistry." The cruelty of it, letting the healer try and fail, made Silas's hand itch for his gun. But he noticed something else. Eagle Eye wasn't just grabbing random herbs. His movements, though shaky, were deliberate, and his eyes, when they briefly met Silas's, held more than despair. Chief Running Bear stood in the center of the chaos, still wearing his ceremonial headdress, still maintaining the dignity of his office even as his people died around him. "You have poisoned a wedding feast," he said, his voice carrying despite the moans and cries. You have broken the most sacred of laws. I've done what needed doing. Brooks replied. Your people have been a thorn in civilization's side for too long. Sign the papers. Chief, end this. I will sign nothing while my people suffer. Brooks sighed theatrically. Very well. He pulled out his pocket watch one more time. Colonel McGraw will be here in 10 minutes. Perhaps he can be more persuasive. That's when Silas noticed something odd. Not all the poisoned were dying. Some, after the initial violent reaction, seemed to be recovering, weak, disoriented, but breathing steadier. Whatever Brooks had used, it wasn't uniformly lethal. Meant to incapacitate rather than kill, perhaps, to make the Apache helpless for what came next. Thomas had noticed, too. Look at Samuel Crow Dog, he whispered. He ate more than anyone, but he's sitting up now. It was true. The big warrior who'd gorged himself on canned peaches was struggling to his feet, supported by his brother. Others were stirring too, though many remained dangerously ill. The children are worst hit, Silas observed. Smaller bodies, less resistance to whatever devil's brew Brooks used. A movement caught his eye. Ayanna, still in Brooks's grip, had shifted slightly. Her free hand, hidden by the folds of her red calico dress, was working at something. The knife sheath. She was slowly, carefully, drawing her blade. But Brooks noticed too. Now, dear wife. What's this? He grabbed her wrist, twisting until the knife fell. Such behavior. And here I thought we were building trust. Ayanna spoke for the second time since the ceremony, her voice clear despite everything. I trusted you would bring peace. Instead, you brought death. I brought progress, Brooks corrected. Your people simply need to accept it. That's when Silas saw what Eagle Eye had been doing. Under the guise of tending the sick, the medicine man had been leaving small bundles near certain warriors who hadn't eaten the poisoned food, who remained strong. Weapons, hidden knives, small hatchets, even a few old pistols wrapped in ceremonial cloth. The old healer was preparing for a last stand. Near the eastern edge of the gathering, something else was happening. Daniel Running Wolf, the scout Thomas had sent earlier, had returned. He moved through the crowd like smoke, whispering urgently to warriors as he passed. Whatever he'd seen had put fear in his eyes, but also determination. Silas, a weak voice called. The old scout turned to find Joseph's spotted horse, one of the younger warriors, struggling to stand despite the poison in his system. The signal fire. Someone needs to light the signal fire. Of course, the high hill to the west, where the Apache always kept wood ready for emergencies. 1 fire meant gather, 2 meant danger, 3 meant war. If they could alert the other bands, the scattered camps. Too far, Thomas said. Brooks's men would cut down anyone who tried. Maybe not, Silas mused. If there was enough confusion. A new sound cut through the air, cavalry trumpets, crisp and military. Colonel McGraw's force had arrived. Earlier than Brooks had predicted, they came in perfect formation. 2 columns of blue-coated soldiers splitting to surround the ceremonial ground completely. McGraw himself rode at the front, a thin man with gray whiskers and eyes like winter. Silas had heard the stories. Sand Creek, Washita River, a dozen other massacres. The colonel dismounted with practiced ease, his saber clicking against his boot as he approached Brooks. Captain Brooks, McGraw said crisply. Report. Captain. So Brooks hadn't been lying about everything. He was military, just undercover. The trading company, the months of building trust, the marriage, all of it an elaborate ruse to gather the Apache in one place, proceeding as planned. Colonel. Brooks replied. Though the chief refuses to sign the surrender documents, some resistance to the pacification measures as well. McGraw surveyed the scene, the sick and dying Apache, the armed soldiers, the warriors still standing. His thin lips twisted in what might have been disappointment. Not as many down as projected. The dosage was calculated for adult males. Women and children proved more susceptible. They discussed it like a failed crop yield. Not dying human beings. Silas felt his rage crystallize into something colder, more useful. These men had made a mistake. They'd assumed the Apache would crumble at the first blow. They'd forgotten who they were dealing with. Ayanna suddenly sagged in Brooks's grip, seeming to faint. The captain cursed and shifted his hold to support her, which was exactly what she'd wanted. In one fluid motion, she drove her elbow into his stomach, twisted free, and ran. Not away from danger, toward her father. "Stop her!" Brooks wheezed, but Ayanna was already past his men, her red dress flying like a war banner. The distraction was all Eagle Eye needed. The medicine man threw off his pretense of feebleness and hurled something into the ceremonial fire, a powder that exploded in brilliant white smoke, thick and choking. "Now!" Daniel Running Wolf shouted, and Silas understood. The scout had found something, prepared something. This was their moment. Through the smoke, warriors grabbed the weapons Eagle Eye had distributed. Others, too sick to fight, began crawling toward the edges of the gathering, dragging children with them. It wasn't a battle, not yet, just desperate people taking a desperate chance. Silas grabbed a rifle from a fallen soldier who'd been overcome by smoke and pushed through the chaos toward the western hill. The signal fire. If he could reach it, light it, warn the other bands. A soldier loomed out of the smoke. Silas struck him with the rifle butt, kept moving. Another tried to block his path. Thomas appeared from nowhere, his knife flashing, clearing the way. "Go!" the younger warrior shouted. "I'll hold them." Through the ceremonial ground, similar scenes played out. Joseph Spotted Horse, still weak from poison, wrestled with a cavalryman for his pistol. Samuel Crow Dog, barely able to stand, threw himself at a soldier to buy time for fleeing women. Even the children who could move tried to help, throwing dirt and stones at the bluecoats. But it wasn't enough. As the smoke began to clear, the tactical reality became obvious. 200 Apache, half of them poisoned, armed with knives and a few guns, against 60 trained cavalry with rifles and military discipline. McGraw's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Enough! Cease this foolishness or we open fire!" The struggling slowed, stopped. Apache and soldiers alike turned to where the colonel stood, his pistol raised skyward. Beside him, Brooks had recaptured Ayanna, this time with a gun pressed to her temple. "Chief Running Bear," McGraw called out, "you have 10 seconds to surrender, or I'll order my men to fire, starting with your daughter." The chief stood amid the ruins of the wedding feast, his ceremonial paint streaked with tears for his dying people. Around him, warriors held their pitifully few weapons, knowing they faced annihilation but ready to die fighting. That's when Silas saw her, Ayanna's cousin, Rebecca Swift-Water. She moved like her name, flowing between the soldiers and chaos. Something clutched in her hand, something small and round and familiar, a silver locket, the same locket her sister had worn 2 years ago, when she'd married another white trader and another promise of peace. That trader had disappeared with his bride, never to be seen again. But here was the locket, somehow in Brooks's possession, now falling from his pocket in the struggle. Rebecca held it high, her voice ringing out, "This was my sister's. She married for peace too. Where is she? Where is Morning Star?" A murmur ran through the Apache. Other families remembered other daughters, other promises, other disappearances. The pattern suddenly clear as desert lightning. Brooks's face went pale. This wasn't part of his plan. McGraw looked annoyed at the complication. "Lies and confusion," the colonel declared. 10 seconds. Chief, 9, 8. But Silas was already moving. In the distraction of Rebecca's revelation, he'd found his chance. The western hill loomed before him, the signal pyre waiting. Just a little further. 7, 6. Thomas fought like a man possessed, keeping soldiers off Silas's back. Other warriors joined him, forming a desperate wedge. 5, 4. Eagle Eye began chanting, not healing songs this time, but war songs. Ancient words that made Apache spines straighten and hearts remember who they were. 3, 2. Silas reached the pyre, fumbling for matches with hands slick with sweat and blood. The wood was ready, oil-soaked, waiting. One spark would send the message. One flame would warn their people. One! The match caught. Silas thrust it into the kindling as gunfire erupted behind him. Once, twice, 3 times he lit the prepared sections, ensuring the signal would burn bright and high, as bullets whined past his head and screams filled the air. Silas Ward looked back at the ceremonial ground. The wedding feast had become a battleground. The promise of peace transformed into betrayal and blood. But the signal fire was lit. 3 columns of smoke rising into the desert sky, visible for miles. The message was clear. War. The Apache were at war. And somewhere in the chaos below, a bride in a blood-red dress fought beside her people. The poisoned wedding feast forgotten in the greater horror that had been planned all along. The first volley of rifle fire split the air like thunder, and Chief Joseph Running Bear fell. Silas Ward watched from the signal hill as the great chief crumpled, his eagle feather headdress tumbling into the dust. The warrior who had led his people through 20 winters of hardship, who had sought peace even when war might have been easier, dropped to his knees with crimson spreading across his ceremonial shirt. "Father!" Ayanna's scream cut through the gunfire. She broke free from Brooks's loosened grip, the captain momentarily stunned by what McGraw had ordered, and ran to where Running Bear had fallen. The sight galvanized the Apache. Whatever hesitation remained, whatever hope for survival through surrender existed, died with their chief. Warriors who moments before had been weighing terrible odds now fought with the fury of men who had nothing left to lose. Thomas Crowfeather reached Running Bear first, covering Ayanna with his body as bullets churned the ground around them. The chief still lived, though blood bubbled from his lips as he tried to speak, his eyes, growing dim, fixed on his daughter's face. "The smoke," he whispered, barely audible above the battle. "You sent the smoke?" Silas's signal fires burned bright on the hilltop, 3 pillars of black rising into the clear sky. Every Apache band within 50 miles would see it, would know their people were under attack. Would come. But would they come in time? "Fight!" Eagle Eye's voice rose above the chaos, no longer the quavering tone of an old healer, but the clarion call of a warrior priest. "For Running Bear! For our children! Fight!" The medicine man had produced an ancient war lance from somewhere, its point blackened with age but still sharp. He drove it through a soldier who'd ventured too close, then raised it high. Running Bear's blood on the shaft like a battle standard. The Apache fought with desperate courage. But courage alone couldn't overcome rifles and discipline. For every soldier who fell, 3 Apache dropped. Women shielded children with their bodies. Warriors charged cavalry positions with nothing but knives, buying seconds of time for others to flee. McGraw watched it all with cold satisfaction, occasionally calling out adjustments to his troops' positions like a chess master moving pieces. "Sergeant Morrison, wheel your squad left. Cut off that group trying for the arroyos. Lieutenant Banks, have your men target the warriors first. Leave the women for later." Silas had seen enough. The signal was lit. His job was done. But leaving felt like betrayal. These were his people dying down there, the family that had taken him in when the white world had nothing left to offer but whiskey and regret. He started back down the hill, the old rifle ready in his hands. If this was the end, he'd meet it among friends. That's when he saw them, riders on the southern horizon. His heart leaped for a moment, thinking the signal had worked impossibly fast. But these weren't Apache ponies. These were more cavalry, Brooks's reserves, coming to finish what the main force had started. "No," he breathed, then louder, "No!" But wait, something was wrong with their formation. They rode hard but scattered, and behind them, dust, too much dust for their numbers. And was that the sound of Apache war cries carried on the wind, on the ceremonial ground? Ayanna cradled her father's head as his breathing grew shallow. Brooks approached, his pistol drawn but hanging loose at his side. The captain's perfect plan was unraveling. The clean capture becoming a bloody massacre that would be hard to explain to Washington. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he said, almost to himself. "You were supposed to surrender, a peaceful relocation. No one had to die." Ayanna looked up at him. her face streaked with her father's blood and her own tears. "You poisoned children at a wedding feast. You always meant for us to die?" "No, Brooks stopped, perhaps realizing the futility of lies now. "It was meant to be bloodless, surgical. Remove the leadership, pacify the warriors, relocate the rest. Clean, clean," Ayana repeated, the word like poison on her tongue. She gently laid her father's head down. Running Bear had breathed his last, and stood. "You want clean? I'll show you clean." Before Brooks could react, she'd grabbed the decorative knife from her father's belt. Not to attack, that would have been expected. Instead, she drew it across her own palm, letting blood drip onto the earth. "By my father's blood and mine," she called out in Apache, her voice carrying across the battle. "I swear the oath of vengeance. Let the earth witness. Let the sky remember. Let our enemies know. Apache blood demands Apache justice." It was the old way. The formal declaration that turned personal vendetta into tribal duty. Every Apache who heard it was bound to remember, to carry the debt forward until it was paid. Brooks raised his pistol, but a rifle shot from the hillside spun him around. Silas had found his range. The captain clutched his shoulder, cursing. As more shots followed, the old scout might not be able to save everyone, but he could make these bastards pay for every Apache life. The mysterious riders from the south were closer now, and Silas could see the truth. It was the remnants of another cavalry patrol, but they were running from something. Behind them, Apache warriors on fast ponies harried their flanks like wolves bringing down elk. The signal had worked. Not all the bands, not yet, but some. White Mountain Apache by their paint. Maybe 40 warriors who'd been hunting nearby and saw the smoke. They'd encountered Brooks's reserves and scattered them, now rode to join the fight. "Colonel!" A sergeant ran to McGraw, pointing south. "Apache cavalry incoming. The reserves are broken." McGraw's composed mask finally cracked. This was supposed to be containment, not war, a surgical strike, not the spark that would set the whole territory ablaze. He barked rapid orders, trying to reorganize his lines to face the new threat. But the Apache in the ceremonial ground, seeing salvation approaching, fought with renewed fury. Joseph's spotted horse, despite the poison still weakening his limbs, managed to wrestle a rifle from a soldier and turned it on the blue coats. Samuel Crow Dog, his great strength returning, lifted a cavalryman bodily and hurled him into 2 others. Women who'd seemed helpless moments before revealed hidden weapons. Children threw dirt in soldiers' eyes, bit at hands that tried to grab them, fought with the fierce determination of young wolves. Even the dying struck out one last time, determined to take enemies with them to the spirit world. Thomas had organized a defensive position around the fallen chief's body, gathering warriors and weapons. They couldn't win, but they could hold until help arrived. Each second bought with blood was a second closer to reinforcement. The signal fire on the hill had done more than summon nearby bands. As Silas watched, he saw more smoke columns rising in the distance. Other peaks, other fires. The message was spreading like wildfire across Apache territory. 3 columns here, answered by 3 there, and 3 beyond that. A chain of warning and rage stretching to every band within a day's ride. "We're going to be surrounded," the sergeant reported to McGraw, fear creeping into his military bearing. "Sir, we should withdraw while we can." "Withdraw?" McGraw's voice was ice. "And let them claim victory. Let them think the United States Army runs from savages. Sir, with respect, if all the bands unite, they won't have time." McGraw turned to where Brooks nursed his wounded shoulder. "Captain, execute contingency 3. Brooks paled. "Sir, there are women and children. There are Apache. That's all that matters. Execute contingency 3, or I'll have you shot for cowardice." Silas didn't know what contingency 3 was, but he saw Brooks's men moving to the wagons, pulling out something that made his blood run cold. Bottles, dozens of bottles filled with clear liquid, and torches, kerosene. They meant to burn the whole ceremonial ground. "No!" The protest tore from his throat as he half ran, half slid down the hillside. But he was too far away. Too late. The White Mountain warriors struck the cavalry's flank like a thunderbolt. their leader. A young war chief named Marcus Black Eagle had seen the smoke and ridden hard, gathering fighters as he came. 40 Apache against 60 cavalry might have been suicide on open ground, but the ceremonial site was chaos. Smoke and dust and bodies creating confusion everywhere. "For Running Bear!" Black Eagle shouted, driving his lance through a soldier. "For the poisoned feast! For Apache honor!" The cavalry line buckled, caught between the defenders and the attackers. McGraw screamed orders, trying to maintain formation, but the careful military precision was breaking down into 100 individual fights. In the center of it all, Ayanna stood like a statue beside her father's body. The blood oath had transformed her from bride to warrior woman, from chief's daughter to vessel of vengeance. When a soldier tried to grab her, she moved with deadly grace, her father's knife finding the gap in his uniform. When another raised his rifle, she flowed aside, letting Thomas's hatchet take him down. But Brooks's men were already spreading the kerosene, splashing it on wagons, on supplies, on the feast blankets where poisoned Apache still lay helpless. The captain, one arm useless but determination in his cemetery eyes, struck a lucifer match. "Everyone out!" he shouted to his men. "Burn it all!" The first torch flew, and flame exploded across the ceremonial ground. The fire spread with hungry speed, feeding on spilled kerosene and dry desert wood. Smoke billowed black and choking, adding to the chaos. Screams rose from those too sick or wounded to flee. The fire didn't discriminate between Apache and soldier, between living and dead. It consumed all equally, turning the wedding ground into an inferno. Silas reached the edge of the flames, the heat driving him back. Through the smoke, he could see Thomas and others dragging people clear, could hear Ayanna calling for help to move the wounded. But for every person saved, another was lost to smoke or flame or bullet. Eagle Eye appeared through the smoke like a spirit of vengeance. His war lance dripping red, the old medicine man's eyes held a fury Silas had never seen before. "The children!" he gasped. "Help me save the children." Together they plunged into the inferno, grabbing small bodies, some moving, some terribly still. The smoke burned their lungs. The heat seared their skin, but they kept going. Others joined them, Apache and even a few soldiers who'd lost their stomach for slaughter, working together in the face of greater horror. The White Mountain warriors had broken through completely now, scattering McGraw's neat formations. More smoke columns rose in the distance. 2 bands, 3, 5. The Apache nation was awakening to war, and every warrior who could ride would be coming. McGraw, finally accepting reality, called for retreat. Withdraw in order, fighting retreat to Fort Grant. But there would be no orderly withdrawal. The Apache, reinforced and furious, pressed hard. The ceremonial ground burned behind them, but ahead lay vengeance. Every soldier who fell was payment for the poisoned feast, for Running Bear's death, for the betrayal of sacred hospitality. As the cavalry fled and the fires burned lower, Silas found himself beside the signal hill once more. His fire still burned, their message spreading across the territory like blood through water. He was hurt, burns, a bullet graze he didn't remember taking, smoke-scarred lungs, but alive. Below, Ayanna stood among the survivors, still wearing her wedding dress, now torn and blood-stained beyond recognition. The gold ring Brooks had placed on her finger was gone, thrown into the flames with her father's body. In her hand, she held Running Bear's knife, its blade reflecting the dying fire. The wedding feast was over, the betrayal complete. The Apache had lost dozens of their people, including their greatest chief. But the signal had been sent, the warning given. And across the desert, warriors were mounting their ponies, checking their weapons, riding toward the smoke that promised vengeance. Brooks's perfect plan had succeeded in gathering the Apache together, but not for surrender. For war, and this time, there would be no treaties, no promises, no arranged marriages to seal a false peace. This time, there would only be blood. The signal fires burned through the night, and by dawn, they came. From every direction, Apache warriors rode toward the smoke that still rose from the ruined ceremonial ground. They came in small bands and large, painted for war, carrying rifles traded from Comancheros or ancient bows passed down through generations. By the time the sun climbed high, nearly 200 warriors had gathered where wedding joy had turned to massacre. Silas Ward sat on a boulder overlooking the assembly, his body aching from burns and wounds. He'd lived long enough among the Apache to know this was no ordinary war party. This was something older, deeper, a gathering that happened perhaps once in a generation, when the insult to Apache honor was too great to be borne by any single band. Below, the warriors formed a great circle around the burned ground where Chief Running Bear and so many others had died. The air still stank of smoke and death, and scattered among the ashes were the brass buttons from cavalry uniforms, melted wedding decorations, and bones that had been picked clean by desert scavengers in the night. Marcus Black Eagle of the White Mountain Band spoke first. Young for a war chief at barely 30 winters, he'd proven himself in the rescue charge. Brothers, we all saw the smoke. We all know what happened here. The White Eyes used marriage peace to gather our people for slaughter. Murmurs of anger rippled through the circle. Every band had similar stories now. Daughters who'd married whites and vanished. Treaties that became traps. Promises that turned to poison. My sister went to such a marriage 3 seasons ago, called out Robert Two Horses from the Chiricahua. Said she'd write, send word, nothing, now we know why. And my daughter, added James Standing Elk, married a trader who promised to take her to California. That was 2 winters past. I thought she'd forgotten her people. But she was dead, wasn't she? Like all the others. The pattern was clear now, written in absence and silence. How many Apache women had been sacrificed to these false marriages? How many families had given their daughters for peace that was never meant to be? Thomas Crow Feather stood, still bearing wounds from the battle. The question isn't what happened. We know that. The question is what we do now. We fight, several voices said at once. Yes, but how? Thomas continued. McGraw has reached Fort Grant by now. He'll spin tales, make us the villains, say we broke a peace treaty. Attacked without cause, more soldiers will come. They always do. It was true. The Apache had won a battle, but the war would bring the full weight of the U.S. Army down on them. They all knew the stories of what had happened to other tribes who'd resisted too fiercely. That's when she appeared. Ayanna emerged from one of the shelters, and the circle of warriors fell silent. She'd traded her ruined wedding dress for traditional Apache garb, doeskin leggings, war shirt, her long hair bound for battle. In her hand, she carried her father's knife. Around her neck, strung on rawhide, hung the gold ring Brooks had forced on her finger, now hammered flat and carved with symbols of vengeance. Women didn't speak in war councils. It wasn't the Apache way. But this woman had sworn a blood oath over her father's body. She'd been at the center of the betrayal, and in her eyes burned something that made even hardened warriors step aside. I have something to show you, Ayanna said, her voice carrying clearly across the circle. From her belt, she produced a leather portfolio, Brooks's papers, taken during the fighting. The captain was careless. He thought us too simple to understand his writing. She opened the portfolio, revealing documents covered in official seals and careful script. Silas moved closer, his ability to read English making him suddenly valuable. Orders, he said slowly, scanning the pages. From the Department of War, Operation Pleasant Valley. Dear God. What does it say? Marcus Black Eagle demanded. Silas's weathered face had gone pale. It's all here. A systematic plan to eliminate Apache resistance through false marriages. Gather intelligence on band movements. Identify important families. Arrange marriages to draw them together. Then... He couldn't continue. The clinical language of genocide stuck in his throat. Ayanna took over, her voice steady as stone. 23 marriages over 2 years, each one ending the same way. The brides taken to remote locations and killed. Their families told they'd gone to live in white cities, all to map our peoples, learn our strengths, prepare for this day. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, a sound began, warriors striking weapon hafts against the ground, a rhythmic thunder that built and built. It was the old sound, the promise sound, the sound that preceded total war. An ancient warrior named Samuel Grey Wolf, so old his hair was white as snow, stood with difficulty. "In my grandfather's time," he said, his voice cracked but strong. "All Apache were one people. We split into bands for survival, sometimes fought each other over hunting grounds or insults. But when the Spanish came, we remembered. When the Mexicans pressed us, we united. Now the Americans force us to remember again." He raised a gnarled fist. "One people, one war, one purpose." The response was immediate and unanimous. One people, one war, one purpose. But unity was easier declared than achieved. The various bands had different strengths, different territories, different relationships with the whites. They needed coordination, strategy, leadership. "Who leads?" asked David Leaping Deer of the Mescalero. "Running Bear is dead. Many chiefs fell in the poisoned feast." This was the crucial question. Without unified leadership, they'd be picked off band by band. But Apache democracy meant no one could simply claim command. Thomas Crowfeather stepped forward. "I propose something new. Not one chief, but a council of war. Each band selects a representative. Decisions made together. Actions coordinated." "And who sits for the Tonto?" someone asked. "Most of their leaders died yesterday." Every eye turned to Ayanna. She was young, a woman, traditionally forbidden from war councils, but she was also Running Bear's daughter, survivor of the massacre, holder of the blood oath. "I will sit for my people," she said simply, "unless another has stronger claim." No one spoke. Who could challenge the claim of one who'd been at the center of the betrayal, who'd watched her father die, who'd turned a wedding ring into a symbol of vengeance? "The White Mountain accept Ayanna for the Tonto," Marcus Black Eagle declared. "The Chiricahua accept," Robert Two Horses added, one by one. The bands voiced agreement. It was unprecedented, revolutionary. But these were unprecedented times. The War Council convened immediately. Maps drawn in the dirt. Knowledge shared. Plans debated. They had advantages. Intimate knowledge of the terrain. Ability to live off the land. Warrior tradition stretching back generations. But the whites had numbers, supplies, and most crucially, time. They could afford to lose battles. The Apache couldn't. "We can't fight them straight up," Silas advised, his white skin no barrier to respect earned through decades of loyalty. "They expect that, want it even, gives them excuse to bring in more troops." "Then how?" David Leaping Deer asked. Ayanna studied the dirt map, her finger tracing routes and locations. "Brooks's plan relied on deception. So does ours. They think us scattered, demoralized. Let them. We hit supply lines, isolated patrols, make them afraid to leave their forts. Raids won't win a war." Someone protested. "No," she agreed. "But they'll buy time. Time for this." She held up Brooks's portfolio again. "Evidence of their crimes. There are whites who oppose what happened here. Missionaries, Eastern newspapers, politicians who speak of honor. If we can get this to them—" "Fight with paper," Samuel Grey Wolf scoffed. "That's not the Apache way. Neither was poisoning wedding feasts." Ayanna shot back. "The old ways alone won't save us. We need new tactics for new enemies." The debate continued as the sun reached its peak. Traditional warriors favored direct action, strike hard, strike fast, make the whites pay in blood. Younger voices supported Ayanna's strategy of propaganda combined with guerrilla warfare. Silas found himself impressed by how quickly she'd grasped the larger picture, how she'd turned from grieving daughter to strategic thinker. Finally, a compromise emerged. They would fight on two fronts. Warriors would harry the soldiers while runners carried evidence of the massacre to sympathetic whites. The bands would coordinate through signal fires and riders, striking where the army was weakest, fading when they gathered strength. "And Brooks?" Thomas asked. "The captain who started this?" Ayanna's hand went to the flattened ring at her throat. He's mine. The blood oath demands it. But first, we survive. Vengeance on one man means nothing if our people perish." As the council concluded and warriors prepared to return to their bands with plans and purpose, an outrider galloped in with urgent news. "Soldiers," he gasped. "3 columns converging from different forts. McGraw has convinced them we're in full revolt. They mean to crush us all." The warriors exchanged grim looks. It was starting already, the full weight of the American military machine turning toward them. They'd known it would come, but so soon. "How long?" Marcus Black Eagle asked. 3 days, maybe 4. They're moving careful, expecting ambush." 3 days to scatter 200 warriors and their families. 3 days to disappear into the vast desert before thousands of soldiers arrived seeking vengeance for their humiliated colonel. "Then we have work to do," Ayanna said simply. She turned to address the full gathering one last time. "My father sought peace through trust. They repaid trust with poison, so we give them what they expect. Apache warriors who strike from shadow and vanish like smoke, but we also give them what they don't expect. Truth carried to their own people, their crimes exposed, their honor questioned." She raised her father's knife high. "For the poisoned feast, for the stolen daughters, for Apache freedom." The response shook the very ground. "For the poisoned feast, for the stolen daughters, for Apache freedom." As the war council dispersed and riders galloped toward every point of the compass, Silas found himself alone with Ayanna for a moment. The young woman who'd stood frozen with fear at her wedding ceremony was gone. In her place stood something harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. "You've changed," he observed. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. Brooks wanted an Apache bride. He got one. He just didn't realize that Apache women are warriors too. When our families are threatened, when our people need us. "This war, it could destroy everything?" "Everything is already destroyed," she replied. "My father, the peace he worked for, the trust between peoples, all ashes. We're not starting a war, Silas. We're finishing one they began with lies and poison." She walked away, back straight, stride purposeful around her. 200 warriors prepared for a conflict that would echo across the Southwest. The wedding feast had ended in horror, just as Brooks had planned. But from that horror had risen something he'd never anticipated, a unified Apache nation, led in part by the very woman he'd tried to use as a pawn, carrying evidence of his crimes and sworn to see justice done. The signal fires had called them to witness a massacre. Now those same fires would coordinate a war that would test whether the Apache could survive the full might of an enemy who fought with paper and promises as readily as bullets and blades. In the distance, dust clouds marked the approach of armies. The Apache had 3 days to disappear, to transform from a gathered target into a scattered, striking force. The real war was about to begin. The desert swallowed them whole. 3 cavalry columns converged on the ceremonial ground to find nothing but ashes and bones. Colonel McGraw sat rigid in his saddle, staring at the empty valley where 200 Apache warriors had vanished like morning mist. His sergeant, a grizzled veteran named Patrick O'Brien, spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Trail's 3 days cold. Colonel, they scattered in every direction. Might as well try tracking the wind." McGraw's jaw worked silently. He'd promised Washington swift retribution, a decisive blow against Apache resistance. Instead, he'd found ghosts and sand. The humiliation burned worse than any wound. "Captain Brooks," he barked, "your intelligence suggested they'd make a stand here." Brooks, his arm still in a sling from Silas Ward's bullet, shifted uncomfortably. The captain's confident manner had cracked since the wedding massacre. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was watching. "They should have, sir. Traditional Apache honor would demand—" "Traditional Apache honor." McGraw's voice could have frozen water. "The same honor you exploited with your marriage scheme? Perhaps your understanding of these people isn't as complete as you claimed. Behind them, 800 soldiers made camp with the efficiency of long practice. They'd come prepared for a major engagement, supply wagons, ammunition reserves. even a surgeon's tent, all of it useless against an enemy that had simply melted away. But the Apache hadn't gone far. From a hidden canyon 6 miles north, Ayanna watched the cavalry through field glasses taken from a dead soldier. Beside her, Marcus Black Eagle counted wagons and horses, memorizing details that would prove valuable later. 40 supply wagons, he murmured. Light guard. They're confident, arrogant, Ayanna corrected. Look how they've positioned themselves. Back to the canyon walls, only one clear retreat path. It was true. McGraw had made the classic mistake of generals who'd never fought Apache. He'd chosen his camp for comfort, not security. The high walls that sheltered his men from wind also blocked escape routes. The narrow valley that funneled water also funneled death. Tonight, Marcus asked. Ayanna lowered the field glasses. No, let them settle. Let them grow comfortable. Tomorrow night, when they're tired from searching empty canyons. When the sentries are bored and thinking of home. She turned to the 30 warriors hidden among the rocks. Not the full force that had scattered as planned, but enough for what she had in mind. Remember, we're not here to fight. We're here to terrify. Take their supplies, their confidence, their sleep. Leave them jumping at shadows. An older warrior, Samuel Crow Dog, frowned. This isn't how Apache fight, sneaking like coyotes instead of facing our enemies. Our enemies poisoned children at a wedding feast, Ayanna reminded him, her voice sharp as flint. They forfeit the right to honorable combat. We fight as they do, with tricks and lies and terror. The warriors accepted this, though some still looked uncomfortable. Apache tradition valued courage in open battle, but tradition hadn't saved Running Bear or the 40 who'd died at the feast. The next night came moonless and black. McGraw had posted sentries, but they watched for an army, not shadows. They expected war cries and charging horses, not silent figures who moved like smoke between their positions. Thomas Crowfeather led the first group, slipping past drowsy guards to reach the supply wagons. No killing. That would raise alarms. Instead, they worked with quick efficiency. Sugar mixed into flour sacks, rifle ammunition replaced with bullets of wrong caliber, cinch straps on saddles cut just enough to fail under strain, water barrels tainted with herbs that would cause cramping but not death. Meanwhile, Ayanna's group targeted something more valuable than supplies morale. They left signs everywhere the soldiers would find them come morning. Apache arrows driven into the ground beside sleeping men, war paint symbols on tent walls, a traditional burial marker placed next to McGraw's tent, suggesting his death was already foretold, but the masterpiece was Brooks's tent. The captain woke to find his space transformed. Every surface bore a message written in what looked like blood, but was actually red clay mixed with the water. The same phrase, over and over, in English and Apache. We know what you did to the 23. Brooks scrambled from his bedroll, eyes wild. On his cot lay a familiar object, a silver locket, tarnished and dirt-stained. Inside, a photograph of a young Apache woman in a wedding dress, smiling with hope for a future that had never come. His scream woke half the camp. By the time soldiers grabbed lanterns and weapons, the Apache were gone. They'd left no bodies, triggered no alarms, fired no shots. But the damage was done. As dawn broke, the extent of the sabotage became clear. Spoiled supplies, tampered equipment, and worst of all, the psychological blow of having been infiltrated so completely. They were here, a young private whispered, clutching his rifle. Right here among us, and we never knew. The story spread through the ranks like wildfire. Apache ghosts who could walk through walls, warriors who could turn invisible. By noon, half the enlisted men were jumping at lizards and checking their bedrolls for arrows. McGraw tried to restore order with harsh discipline, but the seed was planted. That night, despite doubled guards, the Apache struck again. This time they targeted the horses, not to kill, but to spook. Firecrackers, taken from Chinese miners and saved for such purpose, exploded among the picket lines. Horses screamed and bolted, taking half the cavalry's mounts into the darkness. The pursuit was chaos. Soldiers stumbling through unfamiliar terrain, chasing shadows and echoes. 3 men injured in falls. 1 broke his leg in a ravine. By morning, they'd recovered most of the horses. But the message was clear. Nowhere was safe. "Sir," Sergeant O'Brien reported on the third morning, "the men are unsettled, requesting permission to withdraw to Fort Grant for resupply and reinforcement." "Withdraw?" McGraw's face flushed. "We have 800 men. 800 men who haven't slept proper in 3 days. Sir, who are finding snakes in their boots and Apache signs everywhere they look. Morale is—" "I don't care about morale. We have orders." But Brooks cared. The captain hadn't slept since finding the locket. He knew what it meant. They knew about the murdered brides. All of them. The evidence he'd thought burned or buried had survived. Somewhere out there. Ayanna had documents, proof, names. "Colonel," he said carefully, "perhaps a strategic withdrawal." "No." McGraw slammed his fist on the map table. "We advance. The Apache want us to run? We'll show them American resolve. Push deeper into their territory. Force them to defend their camps." It was exactly what Ayanna had hoped for, as the cavalry prepared to move deeper into Apache lands. She met with the other band leaders at a predetermined rendezvous. The War Council had evolved rapidly, adapting to hit-and-run tactics with surprising unity. "They're doing it," she reported. "McGraw's leading them into the Dragoon Mountains." Robert Two Horses of the Chiricahua smiled grimly. "My grandfather's killing ground. Those canyons have swallowed armies before. How many warriors can we gather? 60 here, maybe 40 more within a day's ride. Against 800. We don't fight 800. Ayanna corrected. "We fight their spirit. Make every mile cost them. Every canyon could hide death. Every night brings new terrors. Soon they'll break themselves against their own fear." Old Samuel Grey Wolf nodded approval. The young one learns quickly. Apache have always known, the mind defeats itself faster than any enemy. Plans were made swiftly. The bands would shadow the cavalry, striking supply lines, harrying stragglers, vanishing when confronted. No grand battles, just constant pressure, death by 1,000 cuts. But Ayanna had something else in mind for Brooks specifically, as the cavalry column wound into the mountains. She positioned herself high on the ridgeline with 10 chosen warriors. They waited until the command group passed below, McGraw, his staff, and Brooks riding together. Then she began to sing. It was an Apache death song, high and haunting, echoing off canyon walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The column halted, men looking up nervously. But Ayanna had chosen her position well, invisible among the rocks, her voice carrying clearly to one man in particular. Brooks went rigid in his saddle. He knew that voice. His bride, singing the song Apache women sang over the bodies of their men, singing it for him. The song continued, wordless but full of meaning. Other voices joined from different positions, a chorus of ghosts reminding the living of debts unpaid. The soldiers fingered their weapons, but there was nothing to shoot at, just voices on the wind, promising vengeance. "Keep moving," McGraw ordered, but his voice cracked slightly. They made camp that night in a box canyon, sheltered, defensible, exactly where the Apache wanted them. As darkness fell, the psychological warfare intensified. War drums echoed from the heights. Apache fire signals flickered on distant peaks, seeming to communicate complex messages. Coyote calls that weren't quite coyote calls circled the camp. Then came the arrows. Not a volley, not an attack, just single arrows, falling from the darkness to land precisely where they'd cause maximum fear. One pinned a sergeant's hat to a wagon. Another sprouted from a coffee pot. A third appeared in McGraw's tent, inches from his cot, with a note wrapped around the shaft. "You are counting your last sunsets." By dawn, 3 dozen soldiers had deserted, slipping away in the night rather than face another day of invisible enemies. McGraw raged and threatened, but fear had taken root too deep for discipline to dig out. Brooks was the worst affected. He'd stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped everything but staring at the heights where Ayanna's voice had come from. The other officers avoided him, unnerved by his haunted manner. "She's out there," he muttered to anyone who'd listen. "Watching, waiting. She swore a blood oath. You know, they take those seriously." On the 4th day, the Apache escalated. A supply wagon exploded, Black powder stolen from miners, triggered by a burning arrow. No one was killed, but the message was clear. They could have killed. They chose not to. Yet, soldiers began refusing orders to scout ahead. Others feigned illness to avoid night watch. The column's progress slowed to a crawl as every man expected ambush around each bend. That night, Ayanna played her final card, under cover of darkness. Her warriors placed something in the center of Camp Brooks's marriage certificate, the one from the false wedding, staked to the ground with Running Bear's knife. Around it, arranged in a circle, were 23 stones, one for each murdered bride. But it was what came next that broke them. As the camp stirred at dawn, they found every single soldier's rifle had been marked during the night, a small red handprint on the stock, made with the same clay that had decorated Brooks's tent. 400 rifles, marked while their owners slept. The implication was terrifying. If the Apache could do this, they could have cut 400 throats just as easily. "They're toying with us," O'Brien said, his Irish accent thick with exhaustion. "Like cats with mice." McGraw stared at the marked rifles, his military mind trying to comprehend how it was possible. 800 armed soldiers, reduced to jumping at shadows by perhaps 100 Apache who refused to fight by any rules he understood. "Sir," his aide reported, voice shaking, "Captain Brooks is indisposed." They found Brooks in his tent, clutching the marriage certificate, laughing with a sound that raised hackles. The combination of guilt, fear, and sleeplessness had finally broken something inside him. "She was beautiful, you know," he said conversationally to no one. "At the wedding, beautiful and terrified. I told her she'd warm to me in time, but the ring was cold. She said the ring was cold." McGraw slapped him, trying to restore sense, but Brooks just laughed harder. 23 cold rings for 23 cold brides. But this one lived. This one remembers. Can you hear her singing? Colonel, she's singing for me. As if summoned by his words, Ayanna's voice rose again from the ridgeline. Not the death song this time, but something worse, a lullaby. The kind Apache mothers sang to their children. The kind the murdered brides would never sing to children they'd never have. It was too much. McGraw, the hardened veteran who'd survived a dozen campaigns, looked at his demoralized men, his broken captain, his marked rifles, and made the only decision that made sense. "Sergeant O'Brien, prepare the men. We're withdrawing to Fort Grant." "Sir, you heard me. Full withdrawal. This expedition is postponed." As the cavalry began its retreat, Ayanna watched from the heights. No victory celebration, no war cries. Just grim satisfaction. They'd won this round without a pitched battle, using the enemy's own tactics against them. But she knew this was just the beginning. McGraw would be back, with more men, harder men. The real war was still to come. For now, though, the ghosts had won. 800 soldiers fled from shadows and songs, leaving the mountains to the Apache who'd made them run. And somewhere in that retreating column, a broken captain clutched a blood-stained marriage certificate and whispered about cold rings and patient brides who sang death songs in the dark. The runners had done their work well. 3 weeks after McGraw's humiliating retreat, newspapers from San Francisco to Boston carried the story. Not the version the colonel had telegraphed to Washington of savage Apache treachery and unprovoked attacks, but the truth. Documents from Brooks's portfolio, testimony from Silas Ward, and most damning of all, a list of 23 names, 23 Apache women who'd married white men and vanished, in a boarding house in Tucson. Mary Patterson read the account with shaking hands. She'd taught 2 of those girls at the mission school, watched them leave with such hope for their new lives. Now she knew why they'd never written back. "Merciful God," she whispered, then louder. Mrs. Reeves, come quickly." The boarding house matron appeared, took one look at the paper, and sank into a chair. By evening, half the church women in Tucson knew. By week's end, letters of outrage were flooding government offices. But the Army wasn't finished with the Apache. General William Harrington arrived at Fort Grant with 2,000 men and none of McGraw's hesitation about harsh measures. A veteran of Sherman's march through Georgia. He understood total war. The Apache had humiliated the military. That required answer. Gentlemen, he addressed his assembled officers, we're not here to fight by Apache rules. We're here to end the Apache problem permanently. Every warrior killed, every camp burned, every resource destroyed brings us closer to that goal. McGraw, demoted but still serving, stood stiffly at attention. Sir, their tactics work because we let them. Harrington cut him off. No more chasing shadows. We'll make the shadows come to us. His plan was brutally simple. Destroy everything the Apache needed to survive. Poison water sources. Burn winter food stores. Kill game animals. Make the desert itself their enemy. And the women and children? A young lieutenant asked. Harrington's smile was cold as winter steel. Nits make lice. Lieutenant. Besides, after what happened to Captain Brooks, can we really tell the difference? Their women fight. Their children scout. All are combatants. Brooks himself was absent, confined to the fort's hospital. His mind had never recovered from the mountain campaign. He spent his days writing the same words over and over. The ring was cold. She said the ring was cold. In the Apache camps, the crisis deepened daily. Ayanna's psychological victory had bought time but not security. Now, with poisoned wells and burned hunting grounds, that time was running out. My children cry from hunger. Martha Broken Arrow reported to the War Council. The soldiers found our winter cache. 6 months of dried meat and mesquite flour, gone. Similar reports came from every band. Harrington's strategy was working. Without dramatic action, the Apache would face starvation before spring. We have to attack. Marcus Black Eagle argued. Take what we need from their supply trains. That's what he wants. Ayanna countered. He's using our families as bait, trying to force us into open battle where his numbers matter. Then what? Robert Two Horses demanded. Watch our people waste away? Ayanna studied the map drawn in the dust, seeing patterns others missed. Harrington thinks like a white general, linear, predictable. He protects his main supplies at Fort Grant, sends out columns to destroy ours. But look, here, and here. Civilian supply wagons heading to mining camps, less guarded, full of food. Rob civilians, Samuel Grey Wolf spat. Where's the honor in that? Where was the honor in poisoning wedding guests? Ayanna's voice carried the chill of winter wind. The civilians sell supplies to the army. That makes them part of this war. The debate was fierce but brief. Survival outweighed honor. Plans were made to intercept civilian wagons, take supplies, but spare lives when possible. It wasn't the Apache way. But neither was starving and hiding. The first raid went perfectly. 30 warriors overwhelmed a small wagon train bound for Copper Creek Mine. They took flour, beans, ammunition, and medicine, leaving the teamsters tied but unharmed with water and shade. But Harrington had anticipated this too. The second wagon train was a trap. Hidden among flour sacks were 30 soldiers who erupted in ambush when the Apache approached. The battle was savage and brief. 12 warriors died, including young Daniel Running Wolf, who'd scouted for the wedding massacre. Worse, among the dead soldiers, they found orders. Harrington wasn't just baiting them. He was mapping their movements, learning their patterns. Each raid taught him more about where the bands hid, how they communicated, where they were vulnerable. We're losing, Thomas Crowfeather said bluntly at the next council. Every day fewer warriors, less food, less hope. Some families talk of surrender. Never, several voices said at once, but without the force of before. Exhaustion and hunger had worn down even the proudest spirits. Ayanna sat silent through the arguments, her mind racing. They needed something dramatic, something to break the slow spiral of defeat. Her eyes fell on the cavalry jacket taken from a dead soldier, and an idea formed. Harrington expects us to fight like Apache, she said slowly. So we don't. She outlined her plan. It was audacious, requiring perfect timing and nerves of steel. Many warriors shook their heads, but desperation made even the impossible worth trying. 3 nights later, 20 Apache warriors approached Fort Grant, but these weren't dressed in traditional garb. They wore cavalry uniforms taken from the dead, rode cavalry horses, moved in cavalry formation. In the darkness, exhausted sentries saw what they expected: a patrol returning late. Ayanna rode at the center, her hair tucked under a campaign hat, her face shadowed. The gold ring-turned war trophy hung hidden beneath a uniform that smelled of its former owner's fear. "Patrol returning," Thomas called out, affecting the bored tone of tired soldiers. "Hunting hostiles. No contact." The sentries, eager for news, relaxed their vigilance. "Any sign of them?" "Tracks heading south. Colonels chasing ghosts again." Laughter. Shared complaint about officers and futile missions. The gates opened. They were inside. The Apache moved with practiced calm toward their objective. Not the arsenal or barracks, but the supply depot. Food and medicine for 2,000 men? Enough to keep the bands alive through winter. But also something else. Something Ayanna had noticed in captured orders. Harrington kept detailed records of his campaign, every poisoned well mapped, every destroyed cache documented, every Apache movement tracked. Military intelligence that would doom her people if the systematic destruction continued. While her warriors loaded pack horses with desperate efficiency, she slipped into the command building. The duty officer dozed at his desk, the hour being that dead time between midnight and dawn when vigilance fails. Harrington's office was locked, but Apache women learned many skills, including how to open things meant to stay closed. Inside, she found what she sought: maps, orders, reports, the entire blueprint for Apache extinction, laid out in neat military precision. She took it all, stuffing documents into a dispatch case. But something else caught her eye: a personal letter on Harrington's desk, half-written. "My dear Sarah, the campaign proceeds well. These savages will trouble civilization no more by year's end. I confess the methods trouble me. Poisoning water seems beneath American honor, but results matter more than—" A shout from outside. "Discovery." No time to read more, but she took the letter too. Evidence, proof, ammunition more valuable than bullets. The escape was chaos. Sentries raising alarms, soldiers stumbling from barracks, shots fired wild in darkness. But the Apache had what they came for, and more. They rode hard for the gates, shooting to scatter rather than kill. All but one made it out: Samuel Crowdog. The warrior who'd questioned Ayanna's methods took a bullet meant for her. He fell from his horse at the gate, tried to rise, fell again. "Go!" he gasped. "I'll hold them." There was no time to argue. As they galloped into the desert night, they heard his war cry rise behind them. Then gunfire, then silence. The raid's success was bittersweet. They'd gained supplies to last months and intelligence that revealed every enemy plan. But the cost: another elder warrior gone, another link to the old ways broken. At dawn, they divided the supplies among the bands. Children who'd been crying from hunger ate their fill. Medicine reached the sick, for the first time in weeks. Hope flickered in exhausted eyes. But Ayanna focused on the captured documents. As she read, her expression grew grimmer. Harrington's plan was more thorough than they'd imagined. He intended to turn the very desert against them, creating a dead zone where nothing Apache could survive. "Look at this," she showed the council. "He's mapped every water source for 300 miles. Plans to poison or destroy them all. Every canyon that could shelter us. Every hidden valley. He knows them." "Then we're finished," David Leaping Deer said quietly. "Can't fight the land itself." "No," Ayanna said firmly. "But we can fight the man who'd poison it, and now we know exactly where he'll be." She pointed to the map. 2 days hence, Harrington himself would inspect the northern poisoning operation. A chance to strike at the head of the snake. "It's suicide," Marcus Black Eagle protested. "He'll have a full escort." "Yes," Ayanna agreed. "But he'll also be in Skeleton Canyon, the place of ambush, the place where Apache have killed enemies for generations." She looked around the circle, seeing fear and determination war in tired faces. "This isn't just about supplies anymore. It's about breaking their will like they're trying to break ours. Harrington thinks he's hunting animals. Time to show him he's wrong. The council voted. It was close. Many felt the risk too great. But in the end, the warrior tradition won. Strike the enemy's leadership. Make them afraid. Show them Apache would never be mere victims. As they prepared for what might be their last great ambush, Ayanna spent precious water washing the cavalry uniform she'd worn. It would be needed again, for a deception within a deception. Brooks's false marriage had started this war. Now, another false identity might help end it, or at least make the enemy pay proper price for Apache blood. 2 days later, General Harrington rode toward Skeleton Canyon, confident in his strength, certain of his victory. He didn't know that Ayanna had read his letter to his wife, understood his secret doubts, didn't know she planned to use those doubts like a weapon. The uniform was ready. The warriors were positioned, and in her heart, cold as the ring Brooks had forced on her finger, Ayanna prepared to teach the general what happened to men who made war on Apache families. The trap was set. This time, the Apache were the hunters. And their prey was coming, riding straight into the killing ground where his maps and plans and 2,000 soldiers couldn't save him. In war, Ayanna had learned, everything was a weapon, even mercy. When wielded right, even doubt. When planted deep. General Harrington was about to discover what McGraw and Brooks had learned, that Apache women could be far more dangerous than Apache warriors. Because warriors just killed you. Women made you wish they had. The morning after Skeleton Canyon, the desert bloomed red with more than sunrise. General Harrington's inspection party lay scattered among the rocks, their blue uniforms dark with blood. 60 soldiers had ridden in. None rode out. The general himself had fallen last. 3 Apache arrows in his chest, his face frozen in the shock of a man who'd believed himself invincible. But it was what happened after the killing that would echo through history. Ayanna stood among the bodies, still wearing the cavalry uniform that had gotten her close enough to fire the first shot. Around her, Apache warriors stripped weapons and ammunition from the dead. But she had different work. From her pack, she produced the documents taken from Harrington's office. His plans for poisoning water sources, his letters home admitting doubt about his methods, his careful records of Apache camps targeted for destruction. She arranged them on his body, weighing them down with stones. "Why leave evidence?" Thomas Crowfeather asked. "They know we killed him. They know Apache killed him," Ayanna corrected. "But do they know why? Let them find their general's own words. Let Washington see what their war really means." She placed Harrington's half-finished letter to his wife prominently on his chest. The part about poisoning water being beneath American honor circled in the general's own blood. A message within a message. Then came the harder task. Ayanna withdrew her father's ceremonial knife and approached the ring finger of her left hand. The gold band Brooks had forced on her still hung on rawhide at her throat, hammered flat and inscribed with vengeance symbols. But that wasn't enough. Not anymore. "What are you doing?" Marcus Black Eagle asked, alarmed. "Finishing something," she replied, and before anyone could stop her, she'd drawn the blade across her ring finger, cutting deep. Blood flowed freely, and she let it drip onto Harrington's papers, onto the ground, onto the wedding ring. "By my father's blood and mine," she spoke the formal words. "The debt is paid in part, but until the last false promise is revealed, until the last stolen daughter is avenged, the oath remains." She wrapped her wounded hand, then set about the final preparation. Using Harrington's own supplies, she created a pyre, not for burning bodies, but for burning lies. Into it went copies of Brooks's documents about the murdered brides, testimony written in careful English about the poisoned wedding feast, and lists of every Apache grievance against those who'd promised peace and delivered death. But she kept the originals. Those would travel another path. "Light it," she commanded. The smoke rose black and thick, visible for miles. Not a signal fire this time, but a funeral pyre for falsehood. Let the army come and find their general surrounded by evidence of his crimes. Let them try to explain to newspapers already sympathetic to Apache suffering. As the war party prepared to leave, a scout galloped in with urgent news. "Riders coming from the south, Apache, but not any of our bands." They fly the old symbols. Ayana's heart leaped. The old symbols meant Apache from Mexico, bands that had fled rather than surrender to reservation life. If they'd seen the smoke signals, if they'd heard of the war. An hour later, she stood facing Miguel Red Sky, a legend among their people, 60 winters old but sitting his horse like a young warrior. He'd fought Americans, Mexicans, and Spanish with equal fury. Behind him rode 50 warriors, lean and hard from years of guerrilla warfare. "So," Red Sky said, studying her with eyes that missed nothing, "you're the wedding bride who started a war." "The war started with poisoned children," Ayana replied steadily. "I just refuse to let it end with our surrender." He smiled, an expression rare as rain. "Your father and I rode together as young men. He chose peace. I chose war. Strange that his daughter now leads what I could not, a united Apache resistance. Will you ride with us?" Red Sky gestured at his warriors. "We've come this far, but understand, young one, we fight by the old ways. No quarter for enemies, no mercy for those who destroy us." "After what they've done," Ayana said coldly, "mercy is a luxury we can't afford." The combined force moved swiftly back to the hidden camps. News of Harrington's death had spread like wildfire, bringing both celebration and fear. Without their general, the army might negotiate, or they might seek terrible revenge. At the main camp, Ayana found unexpected visitors. Mary Patterson from the Tucson Mission School had arrived with 2 other white women, all looking determined despite obvious fear. "Miss Patterson," Ayana said carefully, "this is dangerous." "Mrs. Brooks." The teacher interrupted firmly. "That's still your legal name, isn't it? From the marriage?" Ayana's face hardened. "That name died with my father. Perhaps, but it might still serve a purpose." Mary held out a bundle of papers. "These are sworn statements from every mission teacher in the territory. We've documented every Apache girl who married white men and disappeared. 23 names, just as you said, but also 15 more we've discovered. 38 murdered women." The number hit like a physical blow. "We've sent copies to newspapers, congressmen, even the president," Mary continued. "But we need someone to speak for them. Someone who survived. Someone whose very existence proves the Army's lies." "You want me to, what? Testify? Stand trial?" "I want you to tell the truth," Mary said simply. "In court, in newspapers, wherever people will listen. The Army can dismiss Apache testimony as savage lies. They can't dismiss you, legally married to a U.S. Army officer, educated enough to speak their language, living proof of their crimes." It was a different kind of warfare, one Ayana had considered but not fully embraced. To fight with words in their courts meant acknowledging their authority. It meant risk imprisonment, execution, forced return to Brooks if he recovered his wits. "Think about it," Mary urged. "Your warriors can't fight forever, but the truth can win where bullets fail." That night, the War Council debated fiercely. Traditional warriors like Red Sky saw legal battles as weakness. Younger leaders recognized the strategy but doubted white justice. Ayana listened to all, weighing paths forward. "We fight on 2 fronts," she finally declared. "Warriors who wish continue the resistance, but I'll take their own laws and use them as weapons. Let them try Brooks for murder. His crimes are documented. Let them explain Harrington's letters about poisoning water. Let them face the families of 38 dead women." "And if their courts betray you?" Silas Ward asked. The old scout had aged years in months, but his loyalty remained absolute. "Then we'll have proven what Apache always suspected, that white justice is another lie. Either way, we win something." Preparations began immediately. Half the warriors would continue harassment operations, keeping the Army off balance. The other half would protect the families, moving them to safer territories while attention focused elsewhere. Ayana prepared differently. She studied the documents, practiced her English, transformed herself from war leader to legal weapon. The wedding dress Brooks had given her, blood-stained and torn, was carefully preserved. Evidence. The ring, now properly severed from her finger and covered in her blood, became Exhibit 2, 3 days later, she rode toward Tucson with a small escort. Word had already spread. The Apache bride was coming to testify. Some called her hero, others traitor. The army wanted her arrested. Civilians wanted to hear her speak. At the edge of town, she changed from Apache garb to a simple black dress Mary Patterson had brought, mourning clothes, appropriate for a widow, though her husband still lived in madness at Fort Grant. "You're sure?" Thomas asked one last time. "My father tried peace through trust." Ayanna replied, "I'll try peace through justice. If both fail, at least we'll have shown the world their true face." She entered Tucson not as a war chief, but as Mrs. Ayanna Brooks, widow of massacre, survivor of betrayal, voice for the silenced dead. Behind her, the desert still burned with Apache resistance. Ahead lay courtrooms and newspapers, a different battlefield with different rules. The wedding feast had ended in horror. The war had claimed hundreds on both sides. But perhaps in the halls of their own justice, truth might accomplish what violence could not. Recognition that Apache were people, not animals, that their daughters' lives mattered, that promises written in blood demanded answer. As she walked toward the courthouse where crowds already gathered, Ayanna touched the scar on her ring finger. The blood oath remained, but its fulfillment might come through unexpected means. Brooks had wanted an Apache bride to seal false peace. Instead, he'd created something far more dangerous, an Apache woman who could fight in both worlds, carrying 38 ghosts and the hope of a people into the enemy's own arena. The real battle was just beginning, and this time, the weapons would be words, laws, and the uncomfortable truth that civilization's claims of superiority rang hollow when built on murdered women and poisoned wells. In the desert, signal fires still burned. But in Tucson, a different kind of fire was about to be lit, one that would illuminate crimes hidden in shadow and force a nation to confront what was done in its name. The Apache bride had come to claim justice, and one way or another, the dead would have their due.